Sarah packed the last of her clothes into a worn suitcase, her hands trembling slightly. The bruise on her wrist had faded to a dull yellow, but the memory of how it got there remained vivid. 3 days ago, she'd finally found the courage to leave Mark after 8 years of marriage that had slowly morphed into a prison. Now, standing in her friend Jen's spare bedroom, she was facing the terrifying prospect of starting over at 34. "You sure about this?" Jen leaned against the doorframe, concern etched across her face. "You could stay longer. No rush." Sarah zipped the suitcase closed with finality. "I need to do this. As long as I'm here, he'll keep trying to find me." The small town of Millfield was 4 hours away, far enough that Mark wouldn't accidentally run into her, small enough that rent wouldn't drain her savings within months. She'd found a tiny studio apartment online and paid the deposit with the emergency credit card she'd kept hidden for years. The drive to Millfield was quiet except for the occasional directions from her phone. Each mile put distance between Sarah and her old life, but also brought her closer to an uncertain future. What did people do when they had to rebuild from scratch? The question looped in her mind as familiar landscapes gave way to unknown territory. Millfield revealed itself gradually. A main street with shops that had clearly been there for decades, neighborhoods with modest homes, and a small park where a few children played despite the autumn chill. Sarah's apartment was above a hardware store, accessible by an exterior staircase that creaked under her weight. The landlord, an elderly man named Ed, handed her the keys without much conversation. "Rent's due first of the month. Laundromat's 2 blocks down. Water gets hot if you give it time." He nodded and left her standing in the empty space that would now be home. The apartment was smaller than it had looked in photos. A kitchenette occupied one wall, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around and took up a corner, and the rest was meant to serve as both living room and bedroom. The only window faced the back alley, offering a view of dumpsters and the brick wall of the neighboring building. Sarah sat on her suitcase and allowed herself 5 minutes of doubt. 5 minutes to wonder if she'd made a mistake, if starting over at her age was foolish, if loneliness would eventually drive her back to Mark. When the 5 minutes ended, she stood up and began unpacking. That night, sleeping on a newly purchased air mattress, Sarah jerked awake several times, certain she'd heard Mark's footsteps or the sound of his key in the lock. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but there was no time to rest. She needed a job, preferably one where Mark couldn't track her down if he somehow discovered which town she'd fled to. The coffee shop on Main Street wasn't hiring. Neither was the grocery store or the pharmacy. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's hope was fading as quickly as her energy. She stopped outside a bookstore called Turner's Pages, more to rest her feet than anything else. A help-wanted sign hung crookedly in the window. Inside, books were stacked in precarious towers that defied gravity. The smell of paper and dust filled the air, occasionally punctuated by the sharper scent of coffee from a small counter at the back. A man about her age sat behind the register, engrossed in a thick paperback. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice coming out smaller than intended. "I saw the sign in the window." The man looked up, seeming almost surprised to find a customer in his store. He had the kind of face that looked perpetually tired, lines around his eyes, a permanent crease between his brows. "Oh, right. You interested?" "Yes. I just moved here and I need." Sarah stopped herself from oversharing. "I'm looking for work." "Ever worked in a bookstore before?" She shook her head. "I was an administrative assistant at a law firm for the last 7 years. But I learned quickly." He studied her for a moment. "I'm David. This was my mom's place. She died 6 months ago, and I've been trying to keep it running, but I can't be here all the time." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It doesn't pay much." "That's okay," Sarah said quickly. "I just need something steady." David nodded, as if he understood more than she'd said. "Can you start tomorrow?" 10 to 6, Tuesday through Saturday. Relief washed over her like a physical sensation. "Yes, absolutely." That evening, Sarah made a simple dinner on her hot plate and ate standing by the window. She watched people heading home from work, carrying groceries, walking dogs. Normal people living normal lives. Maybe someday that would be her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "I know you'll come back." "You always do." Sarah's hand shook as she blocked his number for the 3rd time that week. Then she pulled the blinds closed, shutting out the darkening sky and the fear that had followed her to Millfield. Tomorrow would be her first day at the bookstore. Tomorrow would be another step forward. She unrolled her sleeping bag on the air mattress and tried to find a comfortable position. The unfamiliar sounds of the building, pipes knocking, floorboards settling, the distant hum of traffic, kept her on edge. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something she hadn't felt in years, the faint stirring of possibility. In the morning, she would begin again. A month into her job at Turner's Pages, Sarah developed a rhythm. She arrived at 9:45 each morning, started the coffee brewing, and spent the quiet first hour shelving returns and straightening the seemingly endless piles of books. David typically showed up around noon, often carrying a box of new acquisitions from estate sales or library clearouts. They worked together until closing, rarely speaking beyond what was necessary. The bookstore wasn't busy. On a good day, maybe 20 customers wandered in, and half of them left without buying anything. But Sarah found comfort in the quietness, in being surrounded by stories while she slowly pieced together her own. "You've got a system going," David commented one afternoon, watching her sort through a newly arrived box of paperbacks. "Mom just piled everything wherever there was space." Sarah looked up, surprised by the personal remark. "It was a bit confusing my first week. I kept thinking I was losing books." A hint of a smile crossed David's face. She knew where everything was, though. Could find any book you asked for in seconds. His expression clouded slightly. "I'm still trying to figure it all out." It was the most he'd shared since hiring her. Sarah had pieced together bits of information, that David had been a professor at a college 2 towns over, that he'd moved back to take care of his mother during her illness, that he hadn't meant to become a bookstore owner. "Did you want to sell it?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry." David shrugged. "Sometimes. But then I think about how much she loved this place." He gestured around the shop. "It was her whole life after my dad left." A customer entered, ending their conversation. But something had shifted between them, a small opening in the careful distance they'd maintained. That evening, Sarah walked home through the park instead of taking her usual direct route. The air was getting warmer as spring approached, and families lingered on the playground. She watched a mother push a laughing toddler on a swing, feeling the familiar ache of what could have been. She and Mark had talked about children in the early years, before his temper became unpredictable, before she began walking on eggshells in her own home. Her apartment still felt temporary after a month. She'd bought a rail bed and a small table with 2 chairs, but the walls remained bare. Something about hanging pictures felt too permanent, too much like admitting this was now her life. Sarah made a simple dinner and ate while scrolling through a library audiobook on her phone, a luxury Mark had never allowed, claiming the sound of other voices in their home irritated him. The small freedoms still surprised her sometimes. The next morning, an elderly woman entered the bookstore, peering around with evident confusion. "Can I help you find something?" Sarah offered. The woman clutched her purse tightly. "I used to come here every week to see Eleanor. We had our own little book club, just the 2 of us." She blinked rapidly. "I didn't know she'd passed until my neighbor told me last week. I've been out of town with my daughter, you see." Sarah recognized Eleanor as David's mother. "I'm so sorry for your loss. She always recommended the perfect books," the woman continued. "Not like those chain stores where they don't know anything." Eleanor understood what I liked. When David arrived later, Sarah mentioned the visitor. "She seemed really upset about your mom." David nodded. "Mrs. Chun. She and Mom read all the same mystery novels." He sighed. "I should have contacted her regular customers, but I barely knew who they were." "We could start a book club," Sarah suggested, the idea forming as she spoke. "For your mom's old customers, or anyone who's interested. It might bring in some business." David looked skeptical. "I'm not much of a people person." "I could run it," Sarah offered, surprising herself with her own boldness. When had she last volunteered for anything? Mark had systematically discouraged her friendships, her hobbies, anything that took her attention away from him. "You'd want to do that?" "I think it could be good. For the store, I mean. And for me," she thought but didn't say. David considered it. "Okay, if you want to set it up." Sarah spent her lunch break creating a simple flyer on the store's ancient computer. "Turner's Pages Book Club. First meeting Tuesday, 7 p.m. All welcome." She printed a stack and placed them by the register, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. What if no one came? What if they did? She taped a flyer to the window and saw Mrs. Chun walking by. Sarah rushed outside, catching the older woman before she turned the corner. "Mrs. Chun, we're starting a book club at the store. I thought you might be interested." The woman's face brightened. "Oh, Eleanor would have loved that." She took the flyer, studying it. "Tuesday at 7? I'll be there." Throughout the week, Sarah handed out flyers to customers who seemed receptive. By Monday, her anxiety was building. She hadn't led anything in years. Mark had eroded her confidence so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was gone. Tuesday evening came, and Sarah rearranged the chairs in the small reading nook at the back of the store. David had offered to stay, but she'd assured him she could handle it. Now, as 7 o'clock approached, she regretted not accepting his support. Mrs. Chun arrived first, followed by 2 middle-aged women who introduced themselves as sisters, then a college student, a retired teacher, and finally, to Sarah's surprise, the woman who ran the coffee shop down the street. 6 people. 6 strangers willing to give her book club a chance. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought we could start by introducing ourselves and maybe mentioning a book we've enjoyed recently." As the conversation began to flow, Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. These people didn't know her history. They didn't see her as Mark's broken wife or as a victim fleeing her past. Here, in this small circle of readers, she could be anyone. She could be herself, whoever that was. By the end of the evening, they'd chosen their first book to discuss the following week. As everyone left, Mrs. Chun squeezed Sarah's hand. "Eleanor would have approved of you," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. After locking up, Sarah walked home under a sky scattered with stars, feeling lighter than she had in months. One small step, one tiny piece of herself reclaimed. The book club grew. By the 3rd meeting, they'd outgrown the reading nook and had to rearrange the display tables to make room for 11 participants. David began staying late on Tuesdays, not actively participating but hovering near the back, ostensibly restocking shelves while listening to the discussions. "We might need to limit membership if more people join," Sarah told him one morning as they opened the store. "We're running out of space." David looked around thoughtfully. "There's the storage room upstairs. Mom used it for overstock, but it's got those big windows that face the street. Might work if we cleared it out." Sarah tried not to show her surprise. David rarely offered solutions. He typically nodded and let her handle problems. "That would be perfect. Should I start moving things?" "I'll help," he said. "It's mostly old boxes I should have dealt with months ago." They spent the next few days sorting through the upstairs room during slow periods at the store. Eleanor had kept everything: decades of order forms, ancient catalogs, boxes of holiday decorations, and stacks of her personal books. Sarah worked efficiently, creating piles for keeping, donating, and discarding, while David moved more slowly, stopping often to examine his mother's belongings. "Look at this," he said, holding up a photo album he'd found inside a box of Christmas ornaments. Mom kept pictures of every book club she ever hosted. Sarah joined him, peering over his shoulder at faded photos of Eleanor surrounded by customers, all holding books, many smiling at the camera. "She looks so happy." "She was," David said softly. After Dad left, the store became her whole world. He flipped through more pages. "I used to resent that. How much time she spent here instead of at home." Sarah watched his face, seeing grief and regret mingle there. "She built something special," she offered. "People still come in and talk about her, you know, about how she always remembered what they liked to read." David nodded, closing the album carefully. "Thanks for doing this, by the way. The book club. Mom would have been glad to see it going again." There was a new easiness between them after that day, a quiet understanding that made their shared work more comfortable. Sarah began looking forward to the moments when the store was empty and they could talk while sorting books or rearranging displays. David wasn't much for conversation, but when he did speak, she found herself listening closely to his thoughtful observations about books, customers, or life in Millfield. The upstairs room transformation took 2 weeks. They moved bookshelves from the main floor to create a cozy space with chairs arranged in a circle. Sarah found string lights in one of Eleanor's boxes and hung them along the ceiling beams, giving the room a warm glow in the evening hours. "It's perfect," Mrs. Chun declared at the next meeting, settling into one of the chairs with evident satisfaction. Eleanor would have loved this room. The new space allowed the club to expand to 15 members. Sarah began dividing their meetings into discussion time and social time, noticing how many of the participants lingered afterward, reluctant to end the evening. For many, especially the older members, the club had become an important social outlet. "I've never seen so many people in the store," David commented one evening as the last book club members left. "Even on regular days, we're getting more customers." Sarah nodded, picking up empty coffee cups. "Mrs. Chun brings her friends for shopping tours. And Lisa from the coffee shop is giving a discount if people show their Turner's Pages receipt. Sales are up 20% from last month." David leaned against the counter. "Honestly, I was thinking about cutting your hours before you started the club. The store wasn't making enough." The admission stung, though Sarah understood the business reality. "Well, I'm glad it's working out for everyone." "More than working out," David said. "You've changed this place." Later that week, Sarah was helping a customer find a specific cookbook when the bell over the door chimed. She glanced up automatically and felt her body go cold. Mark stood in the doorway, scanning the store until his eyes locked on hers. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying the same false warmth he always used in public. "Been looking everywhere for you, babe." Sarah's mind went blank. The cookbook slipped from her hands. The customer beside her looked between them, sensing the sudden tension. "Sir, can I help you find something?" David's voice came from behind the counter, steady and neutral. Mark ignored him, moving towards Sarah. "We need to talk. Privately." "I'm working," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely audible. "It'll just take a minute." Mark reached for her arm, his fingers gripping just below her elbow in the exact spot he knew wouldn't show bruises. "Come outside with me." David moved between them so smoothly it seemed accidental. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're actually closing for inventory in 5 minutes. If you'd like to browse quickly, you're welcome to, but my employee needs to finish helping this customer." Mark's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "She's my wife." "Ex-wife," Sarah said, finding her voice. "And I'm not going anywhere with you, Mark." The customer beside her, an older woman with a stern face, stepped closer to Sarah. "Young man, I believe she's made herself clear." Mark's expression hardened. "This is a private matter." "Not in my store." "It isn't," David said, his voice still even but with an unmistakable firmness. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mark looked between them, calculating his options. Sarah knew that look, knew he was deciding whether making a scene would work to his advantage. Finally, he forced a smile. "I'll call you later, Sarah. We have things to discuss." "Don't call me," Sarah said, surprising herself with her steadiness. "There's nothing to discuss." After Mark left, David locked the door behind him and flipped the sign to closed, though it was only 4 in the afternoon. The customer patted Sarah's arm and made a quiet exit, leaving them alone in the suddenly silent store. "You okay?" David asked. Sarah nodded, then shook her head, then found herself sitting on the floor between 2 bookshelves, her legs no longer able to support her. David sat beside her, not touching, just present. "How did he find me?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" David asked gently. "He can't make you go with him." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "You don't know him. He doesn't give up. Neither do you, from what I've seen." David shifted slightly to face her. "Look, my cousin's a cop in the next county. I can call him, ask about restraining orders, whatever you need." The offer was so practical, so lacking in judgment or pity, that Sarah felt tears start. "I'm sorry about closing early." "Don't be ridiculous," David said, the gruffness in his tone belied by the concern in his eyes. "Take the rest of the day. I'll handle things here." Sarah made it back to her apartment in a daze, locking the door and drawing the curtains before collapsing onto her bed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mark, using someone else's phone to bypass her block. "We need to talk about the house. I'm staying at the Millfield Inn until Sunday." The house, their house, which she'd fled without taking anything of value, which had been in Mark's family for generations. She'd already decided she wanted nothing from it, nothing that would keep her tied to him. She didn't respond to the text. Instead, she called Jen, her friend from the city, the one who had helped her escape. "He found me," she said when Jen answered. "Oh God, Sarah. Are you safe? Do you need me to come get you?" The immediate offer of help loosened something in Sarah's chest. "No, I'm okay." He showed up at the bookstore, but David, my boss, made him leave. "Good for David," Jen said fiercely. "What are you going to do?" Sarah looked around her small apartment, at the few possessions she'd accumulated over the past months. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run again. And the other part? The other part is tired of running. Sarah closed her eyes. I have things here now. The book club, the job, people who might actually miss me if I disappeared. Then stay and fight, Jen said simply. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, weighing her options. Running would be easier in some ways. But Jen was right. She'd started building something here. The thought of leaving the bookstore, the book club members, and yes, David, made her chest ache with a different kind of pain than the one Mark had inflicted. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from David. Everything okay? Let me know if you need anything. 6 simple words that somehow contained exactly what she needed. Concern without pressure, support without pity. Sarah took a deep breath and typed back, I'm staying. Sarah returned to the bookstore the next morning despite David's offer to cover her shift. She arrived early, arranging new releases on the front display table with determined focus. When David walked in, he paused, clearly surprised to see her. You're here, he said, hanging his jacket on the hook behind the counter. I'm not hiding, Sarah replied, though her heart had jumped at the sound of the door opening. This is my job, David nodded, respecting her decision without question. I called my cousin last night. He said you could come by the station whenever you're ready to talk about options. Thank you. Sarah straightened a stack of books that didn't need straightening. Mark's staying at the Millfield Inn until Sunday. He wants to talk about the house. The house. Our old place. It's been in his family for generations. She shrugged, aiming for casual but falling short. I don't want anything from it. Maybe you should, David said, surprising her. Not to keep the connection, but because you're entitled to your share. The thought hadn't occurred to Sarah. In her rush to escape, she'd been willing to leave everything behind. The idea of claiming anything felt like prolonging the connection to Mark, but David had a point. She'd contributed to mortgage payments for years. The morning passed quietly. Sarah flinched each time the door opened, but Mark didn't appear. During her lunch break, she walked to the police station and met with David's cousin, Officer Pete Turner, who looked so much like David they could have been brothers. A restraining order is possible, Pete explained, but you'd need to show evidence of harassment or threats. Has he threatened you since you left? Sarah showed him the series of texts Mark had sent from different numbers over the past months. Most weren't explicitly threatening. You need to come home. We need to talk. You can't hide forever. But the persistence and his history of violence spoke volumes. It's a start, Pete said. If he approaches you again after you've clearly told him to leave you alone, call me directly. He handed her his card. And Sarah, document everything. Every call, every text, every time you see him around town. Sarah left feeling slightly more empowered but still uneasy. She took a different route back to the bookstore, avoiding Main Street where Mark might be walking around. The fear of running into him made Millfield feel smaller, the streets suddenly dangerous in a way they hadn't been before. Back at the store, the afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, keeping her mind occupied. At closing time, David asked, Do you want me to walk you home? The offer was tempting. I'm okay, she said, not entirely believing it. But thanks. Take my number at least, he insisted, writing it on the back of a bookmark. Anytime, day or night, if you feel unsafe. Sarah slipped the bookmark into her pocket, touched by his concern. She chose a different route home again, walking quickly, checking over her shoulder at every corner. When she reached her apartment building, she exhaled with relief, then froze. Mark was sitting on the steps. Finally, he said, standing. Been waiting over an hour. Sarah's instinct was to apologize for keeping him waiting, for taking a different route, for existing in a way that inconvenienced him. The habit of placating him was so ingrained it took physical effort to swallow the words. You shouldn't be here. Where else would I be? You won't answer my calls. His tone was reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted to appear rational to outsiders. We need to discuss the house. The mortgage payment is due next week. I'm not coming back, Mark. Sarah stood her ground, though every nerve screamed at her to run. Sell the house. Keep it. I don't care. It's not that simple. Your name is still on the mortgage. Then I'll sign whatever you need to take my name off. She reached for her keys, clutching them tightly. Mail the papers to the bookstore. Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping. What's going on with you and that bookstore guy? You replacing me already? The familiar jealousy made Sarah's stomach clench. My life is none of your business anymore. You're still my wife." "No, I'm not." Sarah moved toward the door, keys extended like a weapon. "Leave me alone, Mark. I mean it." He caught her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to stop her. "We need to talk. Properly. Come have dinner with me. Let go of me." Sarah's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "I've already spoken with the police. If you don't leave me alone, I'll get a restraining order." Mark's expression darkened. "You went to the cops? About what?" "I haven't done anything. You're harassing me right now." She twisted her wrist free. "I want you to leave. Don't contact me again except through a lawyer." For a moment, she thought he might escalate. His face showed the same tightly controlled anger she'd seen so many times before. But they were in public, on a street where neighbors could see. Mark was always careful about appearances. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You can't just walk away from 8 years. Watch me." Sarah unlocked the building door and slipped inside, shutting it firmly behind her. She leaned against it, trembling, listening for sounds of him trying to follow. When nothing happened, she climbed the stairs to her apartment and double-locked her door. She pulled out her phone, hovering between calling Jen and calling David. Jen would understand her fear better, having witnessed the worst of her marriage. But David was closer, in Millfield, and his steady presence had become a source of comfort. She chose David. "He was waiting at my apartment," she said when he answered. "Are you safe now?" "Inside." His voice was calm but alert. "Yes. He didn't follow me in." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed. "I told him to leave me alone, that I'd get a restraining order if he didn't." "Good." The approval in his voice strengthened her. "Do you want me to come over? Or you could come here if you don't want to be alone." The offer was tempting, but Sarah hesitated. "I think I need to stay here. To prove to myself I can." "I understand," David said, and she believed he did. "Keep your phone close. Call if anything changes." After they hung up, Sarah moved through her small apartment, checking the locks again, making sure the windows were secure. She made herself tea and sat by the window, watching the street below for any sign of Mark. The fear was still there, but alongside it was something new, a quiet determination, a sense that she'd crossed a line and wouldn't step back across it. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Still okay?" The simple check-in made her smile despite everything. "Still okay," she replied, and was surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. That night, Sarah slept fitfully, waking at every noise from the street. But in the morning, she felt different, not fearless, but steadier. She'd faced Mark, stood her ground, and survived. It was a small victory, but it was hers. The weekend passed without another appearance from Mark. On Sunday evening, Sarah watched from her window as a taxi pulled up to her building and idled for several minutes before driving away. She couldn't see if Mark was inside, but Monday morning brought a certified letter to the bookstore, documents removing her name from the mortgage, already signed by Mark with yellow tabs indicating where she needed to sign. "He's actually doing it," she told David, showing him the papers. "I thought he'd drag this out for months." David studied the documents. "You should have a lawyer look these over before you sign anything." "I can't afford a lawyer. My sister's a lawyer in Hartford. She'd review them for you." He handed the papers back, just to make sure he's not pulling something. Sarah considered it. Mark had always handled their finances, insisting she didn't need to worry about the details. She'd gone along with it, part of the gradual surrender of control that had characterized their marriage. That would be great, if she wouldn't mind. "I'll call her tonight." David hesitated. "Have you thought about what you'll do if he comes back?" "Pete, your cousin, is helping me file for a restraining order. He thinks we have enough with the texts and him showing up at my apartment." She put the papers in her bag. "I'm not sure it'll stop him if he really wants to find me, but at least there'd be consequences." David nodded, his expression grave. "Just be careful. Don't go places alone at night for a while." The concern in his voice warmed her, but also highlighted how precarious her situation remained. Mark might be gone for now, but the fear lingered, coloring her perception of her new life in Millfield. David's sister called the next day with her assessment of the mortgage documents. "They're legitimate," she assured Sarah. "Once you sign, you'll no longer be responsible for the house or any equity in it." "Is that fair?" Sarah asked. "I paid into it for years. Technically, you could fight for your share of the equity, but it would mean staying connected to him through a lengthy legal process. Is that worth it to you?" It wasn't. Sarah signed the papers that afternoon and sent them by express mail, feeling a weight lift as she watched the package disappear into the postal system. One more tie to Mark severed. The book club continued to thrive. Sarah found herself looking forward to Tuesday evenings, to the lively discussions and the sense of community that had developed among the members. Mrs. Chun had become a particular friend, often staying late to help clean up and chat. "You've brought life back to this place," she told Sarah one evening as they arranged chairs for the meeting. Eleanor would be proud. Sarah glanced at David, who was placing copies of next month's book selection on a display table. "It's been good for me too." "And good for him," Mrs. Chun added, following her gaze. "He was like a ghost after his mother died, just going through the motions." Sarah had noticed the change in David over the past months. He smiled more, engaged with customers, and had started adding his own recommendations to the staff pick shelf. The store itself was changing too. They'd rearranged sections to create better flow, started a children's corner with weekly story times, and even upgraded the ancient computer system to something that could actually track inventory. "We're thinking of extending hours on Fridays," Sarah told Mrs. Chun. "Maybe do an evening event once a month, author readings or poetry nights." Mrs. Chun's eyes twinkled. Sarah felt her face warm. "The store. David and I discussed it." The older woman patted her hand. "It's nice to see you both planning for the future." The comment stayed with Sarah throughout the evening. She was planning for a future in Millfield. The realization should have scared her. Commitment to a place meant becoming findable, settled, vulnerable. Instead, it felt right. After the meeting, as the last members drifted out, David locked the door behind them. "Good turnout tonight." Sarah nodded, gathering empty cups. 17 people. "We might need more chairs soon." "I was thinking," David said, helping her clean up, "the cafe next door is closing. The owner's retiring." "That's too bad. Their coffee was decent. I was wondering if we should look into taking over the space, connecting it to the store. We could expand the book club area, maybe add a proper coffee bar." He spoke casually, but Sarah could hear the underlying excitement. It would be a big project. The "we" wasn't lost on Sarah. "You're thinking of expanding? I thought the store was barely making enough before." "It's doing better now." David shrugged, not quite meeting her eyes. "And I've been thinking about the future. Mom always wanted to grow the place, but she never had the time or energy to take it on. It sounds like a big investment." "It would be." He finally looked at her directly. "I wouldn't want to do it alone." The implication hung between them. Sarah busied herself with wiping down tables, her heart beating faster. "What exactly are you asking me, David?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I'm asking if you'd want to be a part of it. As a partner in the business, not just an employee. I don't have money to invest." "You've already invested more than money," he said. "This place is what it is now because of you." Sarah looked around the store, at the carefully arranged displays she'd created, the book club room upstairs, the corner, where children gathered for story time. In less than a year, she'd helped transform it from a cluttered, struggling shop into a vibrant community space. And in the process, she'd transformed herself. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a big decision." David nodded, accepting her caution without pushing. Of course, no rush. But there was more to consider than just the business opportunity. Their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. Sarah had felt it growing for months. In their easy conversations, their shared looks of amusement over particular customers, the way David always seemed to know when she needed space and when she needed company. They closed up together, falling into their usual rhythm. Outside, the spring evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I could walk you home," David offered, as he had every night since Mark's appearance. Usually, Sarah declined politely. "Tonight," she said, "I'd like that." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the streets of Millfield quiet around them. Sarah had come to love this town with its predictable routines and familiar faces. It felt like a place where she could belong. "I got a letter from Mark yesterday," she said abruptly. "He's moving to Chicago for a job. Said he wanted me to know he wouldn't be bothering me anymore." David glanced at her. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know. Maybe." She'd read the letter multiple times, searching for hidden threats or manipulations. It felt different from his usual messages. Less controlling. "That's good, right?" "Yes. But part of me is waiting for the other shoe to drop." Sarah shook her head. "I hate that he still has that power. making me doubt everything, always looking over my shoulder. It takes time, David said quietly. Trust, I mean. Rebuilding it. They reached her apartment building and stopped outside. In the 6 months she'd lived there, the place had begun to feel like home. She'd finally hung pictures on the walls, planted flowers in pots on her small balcony, accumulated the ordinary possessions that made a space personal. Thank you for walking me home, she said. Anytime. David shifted, hands in his pockets. About the store expansion, don't feel pressured. It was just an idea. It's a good idea, Sarah assured him. I just need to think about what I want. What she wanted. The concept still felt new. To make choices based on her own desires rather than fear or the need to placate someone else. To build something for herself, by herself. Or not entirely by herself, she amended, looking at David. There was something to be said for building something together with the right person. Good night, David, she said, making a small decision. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, a brief, gentle contact. His surprised smile stayed with her as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. Inside, she moved to the window and watched as he walked away, his pace lighter than usual. Sarah touched her lips, considering possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in a long time. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just escaping the past, but creating a future. Her own future, on her own terms. With room for others, but never again at the expense of herself. By fall, renovation work had begun on the cafe space next to Turner's Pages. Sarah had accepted David's offer of partnership, using her savings from the past year as a modest investment. David's sister had drawn up the paperwork, making everything official. Sarah now owned 30% of the expanded business. We should think about a new name, David said as they watched workers knock down the wall between the two spaces. Something that reflects both of us. Turner's has history, Sarah pointed out. People know it. But it's different now. Better. He looked at her. Because of you. They settled on Turner and Hart Books and Cafe, combining David's last name with Sarah's. The sign went up in November, just before the first snowfall of the season turned Millfield into a postcard-perfect New England town. The expansion meant hiring more staff, 2 part-time baristas and a college student to help with weekend shifts. Sarah found herself in a management role, creating schedules and training new employees. It was a challenge she hadn't expected to enjoy so much. You're good at this, David told her one evening as they closed up after a particularly busy day. The whole business side of things. Sarah smiled, remembering how uncertain she'd been when she first arrived in Millfield. I like having control over something. Creating systems that work. Control freak, he teased, bumping her shoulder gently with his. Organized, she corrected, bumping him back. Their relationship had evolved slowly over the months, neither of them rushing. David had taken her to dinner in the next town over, their first official date, though they'd been sharing lunches and coffee breaks for months. The kiss that followed had been careful, questioning, until Sarah had smiled against his lips and pulled him closer. They kept things separate in their own ways. Sarah maintained her apartment, needing the security of her own space. David never pushed for more than she was ready to give. They worked together during the day and spent many evenings together, but not all. Sarah still attended therapy sessions twice a month, working through the lingering effects of her marriage to Mark. I had a nightmare about him last night, she admitted to David one Sunday morning as they shared breakfast at his place. First one in weeks. David reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Want to talk about it? She shook her head. Not really, but it made me realize something. She turned her hand to link their fingers. I'm not afraid anymore. Even in the dream, I stood up to him. The restraining order had never been tested. Mark had kept his word about moving to Chicago, his communication limited to a few formal emails about final paperwork for the house. Each message had been businesslike, without the emotional manipulation that had characterized their marriage. Sarah had begun to believe he had truly moved on. December brought holiday preparations to the store. They decorated with lights and garlands, set up a tree in the children's corner, and planned a special holiday edition of the book club with mulled cider and cookies. The cafe side of the business had taken off quickly, becoming a popular spot for students and remote workers during the day. Eleanor would love what you've done with the place, Mrs. Chin said during the holiday book club meeting, her eyes taking in the festive decorations and the crowd of people filling the upstairs room. I wish I could have known her, Sarah replied, realizing she meant it. David's mother had created the foundation that Sarah had helped rebuild and expand. There was a continuity in that which felt right. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and they were closing up, David surprised her with a small wrapped package. Early Christmas present, he explained. Open it now. Inside was a key attached to a handmade leather keychain stamped with the store's new logo. You already gave me a key to the store, Sarah said, confused. It's not for the store. David looked nervous, reminding her of the day he'd first suggested the expansion. It's for my house. Not that you have to use it. It's just there if you want it. No pressure. Sarah turned the key over in her palm, feeling its weight. Are you asking me to move in with you? Not exactly. Or not right away. He took a breath. I'm asking you to consider it. Eventually. When you're ready. A year ago, such an offer would have terrified her. The idea of giving up her independent space, of becoming dependent on someone else again. But this was different. David had never tried to control her, had supported her independence from the beginning. I'll think about it, she promised, tucking the key into her pocket. Not a yes, not yet, but not a no either. Christmas Eve brought a snowstorm that blanketed Millfield in white. They'd closed the store early, but Sarah had gone back after dinner to retrieve a gift she'd left in her desk. The snow was falling heavily as she unlocked the front door, the street quiet and deserted. Inside, the store was dark except for the twinkling lights on the tree and the string lights in the cafe area. Sarah found herself moving slowly, taking in the peaceful atmosphere. This place had saved her in so many ways, had given her purpose when she needed it most, had introduced her to a community that accepted her, had brought David into her life. She retrieved the gift, a rare first edition she'd found for David, of his favorite childhood book, and was about to leave when she noticed movement outside the front window. A woman stood on the sidewalk, looking at the store's holiday display. Her coat was dusted with snow, her expression hard to read in the dim light. Sarah hesitated, then moved to the door and opened it. We're closed, but you can come in out of the snow for a minute if you'd like. The woman turned, surprised. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just looking at your window. It's beautiful. Thank you. Sarah held the door wider. Seriously, come in and warm up. It's freezing out there. The woman stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. She was about Sarah's age, with tired eyes and a wary expression that Sarah recognized all too well. I'm just passing through town, the woman explained. My bus doesn't leave until morning. Where are you headed? Sarah asked, switching on a few lights. Anywhere, really. The woman shrugged. I needed a fresh start. Something in her tone made Sarah look more closely. A fading bruise was partially visible beneath the woman's makeup. Her hands fidgeted constantly, the way Sarah's had during those first weeks in Millfield. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Sarah asked carefully. The bus station's open all night. The woman's attempt at casualness didn't quite succeed. Sarah made a decision. I have a couch. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable and warm. You're welcome to it. The woman stared at her. You don't know me. I know enough. Sarah smiled gently. My name's Sarah. A year ago, I arrived in this town with nothing but a suitcase and no place to go. Someone helped me. Now I'm offering to help you. I'm Tessa. The woman's voice wavered slightly. Why would you help a stranger? Because someone should. Sarah reached for her coat. We can stop at the cafe on the corner for hot chocolate first, if you want. Their peppermint one is amazing. Tessa hesitated, then nodded. As they stepped back out into the snowy night, Sarah sent a quick text to David explaining where she was going and who she was with. His response came almost immediately. Need me to bring anything to your place? Extra blankets? Food? His unquestioning support made her smile. We're good, she texted back. See you tomorrow for Christmas breakfast. As they walked through the quiet streets, Sarah pointed out landmarks. The park, the library, the community center that offered free classes. Tessa listened silently, her eyes taking in the small town with its holiday decorations and snow-covered charm. It seems nice here, she said finally. Peaceful. It is, Sarah agreed. It took me a while to believe I deserved peace. Tessa glanced at her sharply, recognition passing between them. Does it last? Sarah thought about the store, about David, about the life she'd built piece by piece over the past year, about the key in her pocket and the choices that remained hers alone. I think you have to keep choosing it, she said honestly. But yes, it can last. Back at her apartment, Sarah made up the couch with sheets and blankets, set out a towel and toiletries for her guest, and showed her where everything was in the kitchen. It felt right, extending this small safety to someone else who needed it. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Sarah woke early, made coffee, and found Tessa already up, looking out the window at the snow-covered street below. "Merry Christmas," Sarah said, offering her a mug. "Thank you for everything." Tessa's smile was small but genuine. "I don't know what I would have done." "You would have figured something out," Sarah assured her. "We always do." Later, as they walked to David's house for breakfast, the town gleaming white and pristine around them, Sarah felt a sense of completion. Not an ending. She had too much left to do, to build, to become, but a recognition of how far she'd come. Millfield had become more than a hiding place. It had become home, not because of its picture-perfect streets or quaint shops, but because here she had found herself again, had built connections that mattered, had learned that strength sometimes looks like asking for help, and sometimes like offering it. David was waiting on his porch, coffee in hand, smiling at the sight of them. Sarah introduced Tessa, watching as David welcomed her without question, just as he had once welcomed Sarah herself. Some cycles were worth repeating. As they stepped into the warmth of his house, into the future they were carefully building together, Sarah felt the key in her pocket, not a demand, but a possibility. Once she was finally ready to consider. She had come home, not to a place, but to herself.